Our top Twins prospects. Big day on Locked On Twins with Matt Braun coming up.
You are Locked On Twins, your daily Minnesota Twins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Minnesota Twins podcast. Matt Braun is back. And this is actually a really exciting episode. Not that it's not always exciting with you, Matt, but people love hope, and there is no hope like a prospect list in baseball. Matt, how are you?
Amen, brother. Couldn't have said it better myself. I am doing fine. We have the most rare sunny day in Washington. It doesn't happen in January. So I'm feeling pretty good right now.
Usually it's very dark in there, in that room in which you sit. And today it is bright and nice. And as is the future for the Twins, Matt. We want to thank you for making Locked On Twins your first listen every day.
I couldn't have expected anything else from you. I mean, just beautiful transition on that one.
We are free and available on all podcast platforms. So, Matt, what we're going to do is we're going to pull up your list. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see Matt's. This should be behind a paywall, but for today, we're going to put his list on the YouTube here. So if you're not watching on YouTube, here's Matt's top 10. Austin Martin 1, Jordan Balzovic 2, Royce Lewis 3, Jose Miranda 4, Joe Ryan 5, Josh Winder 6, Simeon Woods Richardson 7, Chase Petty 8, Yohan Duron 9, Matt Cantorino 10. 11 through 20 is an interesting crop as well. But I have some questions about your top 10, Matt.
All right.
I have some questions. And it starts with number 1 in Austin Martin. I have a different number 1. So we're going to go over both our lists. I want to hear your rationale for Martin at 1 on yours.
Well, Martin, to me, really this comes down to a Martin versus Lewis argument, I think. I think the vast majority of people are going to agree with that. I have yet to really see a list from a Twins Daily person specifically who has anyone else, and for good reason. I think they're 1A and 1B to most people. So for Martin, I prefer him to Lewis currently, just because I have more faith in his ability to be a impact major league player. If you're wondering, that's sort of my philosophy for the entire list. What are the odds that I think this guy is going to be an impact major league ball player, whatever you define that as? And so for Martin specifically, I mean, he has just such a unique skill set, one that I really don't think we see a whole lot in MLB these days, actually, of this sort of high OBP, not necessarily a high slugging guy. He can play a handful of positions, probably not shortstop, but center field, certainly, third base, maybe even a little bit of second base. Really, I looked around, and the only guy I could really think of as a solid comp was like Jonathan India. Of course, the great second baseman for the Reds had a phenomenal season, and that's the sort of player we're talking about. A real, leadoff guy, number 2 guy, maybe spreads the ball around, isn't a pull hitter by any means, and if he taps into a little bit of that power, you're talking about a real 4 to 5 win type of guy, no matter where you stick him. So I'm pretty high on Austin Martin.
Yeah, I love hearing that. And obviously we're super excited about this. We talked, I think, right after the Barrios trade, and we both were excited about Martin for sure. And I was watching him closely at the end of the summer. I think this is bringing out an interesting dichotomy in prospect list because I do it differently and I think about it differently. And the reason I think about it differently is I view a prospect in the minors as we always see it as a player as a mold of clay, right? And they need to be developed, and you need to progress your way through to the majors. But I always have thought, at least in the last couple of years, definitely the odds of a middling prospect, and I'm not saying this is Austin Martin, but this is just my thought process on it. When you see a middling prospect, someone who's having some success at the high minors, the jump up to the majors is so great and so large that player is often overmatched to the point of they need to be sent back down in a week. So how I think of a prospect and how I think of a prospect list is the same way you do. I agree with you. Who's going to make an impact at the major league level? I tend to side more with players who have a higher upside, simply have a higher upside, because I think it's so hard to play in the majors. I'm not saying you don't think it is. Obviously, you know that it's very difficult. We don't know, but we know. Very difficult. So I think of who has the highest upside. We view it the same way, but if that makes sense, I think of it as if you have a higher upside, I think you need a higher upside to be able to play in the bigs. And for Austin Martin, I think he's going to be an everyday player. Like, I'm confident in that. And I can absolutely see why he'd be your number one prospect for that reason. I think it's the hardest thing to do in baseball and in sports is to develop a superstar level player, right? And the Twins have one in Byron Buxton. He's not on the field enough. And we were talking, the main point was, how are they going to extend Byron Buxton? You look at Cleveland, we talk about Cleveland all the time. I remember this debate, and John and Aaron were talking about it one time. Would you rather have Jose Ramirez and Francisco Lindor and a bunch of like 1-win players, or would you rather have a bunch of 3-win players? And they were like, we'd rather have Jose Ramirez and Francisco Lindor, because it's the hardest thing to do is develop a frontline starter or a superstar level position player. So that's why that's my thought process, Matt. A long way of saying I do look for more upside. When I'm looking at your list, I don't think you're sacrificing any upside here. You still have Royce Lewis 3. I mean, that's a drop for him. I bet if we looked at your list from last year and the year before, he would have been number 1, but Austin Martin's in the system, and we know the Twins need starters, and Jordan Balazovic is number 2. The biggest change on both of our lists is probably going to be Jose Miranda at 4. What's your faith when you talk about Martin and your confidence level in him being an everyday player? Where does that stand with Jose Miranda ranked 4th, right behind Royce Lewis and ahead of Joe Ryan?
Well, I mean, I could talk for days about Jose Miranda. His season last year was just I've never seen anything like it in the minor leagues. I mean, we all saw the Zips projections come out, and they said he was like a 1.5 win player like today.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with that. I think he could start the year in the majors, playing first, playing third, doesn't really matter. And I think he can rake. So I wanted to bring this point up specifically because I was kind of perusing through his stats, and it was just absurd. So between AA and AAA last year, he slugged .572, right? Here's a list of all qualified major league hitters who did that. Nick Castellanos, Shohei Ohtani, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Fernando Tatis Jr., Bryce Harper. That's the entire list. Now, Jose Miranda also struck out only 12.5% of the time, which is insane. And so let me pull up a list of guys who had a lower K percentage. Again, only 5 guys. Yuli Gurriel, Adam Frazier, Michael Brantley, David Fletcher, Kevin Newman. And neither of those guys came close to his slugging percentage. You're talking about a real, incredibly unique skill set to avoid strikeouts while still having an immense amount of power.
Spotless. He was spotless.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's the kind of skill set that you do not see it, not just every day. You almost never see it. So I'm incredibly excited for him. In hindsight, now that I'm looking back at the list, going on in my sort of philosophy, as I've pointed out, I probably could have knocked him up a spot or two. But I mean, at the end of the day, I believe he can be an everyday major league player. Wherever I rank him doesn't really matter.
A lot more coming from Matt's list and mine after this word from Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bars are covered in 100% chocolate. They're soft and easy to chew. And here's an idea for the new year. Matt and all our listeners, go to all your secret treat stashes at home, in the pantry, in the car, wherever. Throw out all those snacks, replace them with Built Bar, and go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15. That's promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Matt, I will ask you, have you ever had a Built Bar?
I have no idea what it is.
They are delicious and they're healthy. Try Built Bar. Matt, here's his list again if you're watching on YouTube. Simeon Richardson 7. So maybe the most interesting thing on these lists outside of Miranda and the number 1, I mean, there are some really interesting conversations to come from the Twins prospect list this year, is the ranking of these right-handed starters in the system, right? Not only mixed in with Martin, Lewis, and Miranda, because you also will notice that after Martin, Lewis, and Miranda, you don't have a position player until Noah Miller at 11, if I'm not mistaken here. And that's kind of how this system looks right now. They have 3 high-level differing position players and then a ton of right-handed starters in between them, or right-handed relievers perhaps in the future, hopefully not. But you have Balazovic 2. He's your top right-handed starter, your top pitching prospect. Joe Ryan is 5, Winder 6, Woods Richardson 7, Petty 8, Duron 9, Cantorino 10. So if you're keeping track at home, that is a lot of right-handed pitching prospects. Who are you most excited about, Matt? Maybe not reflected in your rankings, but who excites you the most out of these 10, I guess 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10 pitching prospects?
Who excites me the most? I guess I hadn't thought about that. If you're talking about, I guess, from pure upside, like which guy I think of these arms has the best chance at becoming that stud, it's got to be Chase Petty. I mean, I just electric stuff already as 18, 19-year-old, whatever he is. I mean, guys shouldn't be throwing like that out of high school. That's just not fair. So, of course, he only pitched a few innings in the Twins system this last year. He's going to be spending a lot of time polishing, really working on his mechanics. I don't think we're going to really see a true sort of full season from him. Maybe not even this coming year, probably the year afterwards. But either way, he is absolutely this long-term big stud ace. But if you want to talk about a guy who's going to have the most impact soon, I don't want to say Joe Ryan because he's the obvious one. It's got to be Balazovic to me. I still think Balazovic is the best starting pitching prospect in the system. I know Joe Ryan got a lot of hype, and I understand why he did, but I still think it's Balazovic. Every time I watch him pitch, he just seems like he was a guy who had a plan, and he knew what he was doing. And he didn't have the best year last year, but it was his first full season at Double-A. Missed a little bit of time with injury. Still came out and threw like 97 innings, I think it was, among the highest in the Twin system. So I'm still very high on Balazovic. I think he could be up easily this year, at the very least next year, and I think he'll be an impact arm.
Yeah, I agree with you because I think, here's my list, by the way. I think that Balazovic combines, I actually have Ryan 4, but I think Balazovic combines upside and floor in a really interesting way. And I think maybe in the best way in the system. I have Ryan at 4 because, yes, I really did like what we saw from Joe Ryan. I think he's a number 3 or 4 starter right now. Balazovic, I think, will finish. He could be a number 2. I think with Joe Ryan, I don't think Joe Ryan can be a number 2. And I'd be really glad to be wrong about that. But I think you can disagree with me, Matt. Maybe this is another point of conversation with these pitching prospects. I think you still need the stuff. And I'm not saying Joe Ryan doesn't have the stuff, but in order to reach that threshold of being a 1 or a 2, if you listed off for me right now, Matt, the best pitchers in baseball, I would bet you every single one has a 95 plus mile an hour fastball. Like it's just a reality of the game. Like, I'm not saying it's needed to be good. I'm not saying it's needed to be a really effective playoff level starter, but to be among the best in the game, I think you need it. What's your response to that, Matt?
I think you're right in a lot of ways. I have questions about Ryan's ability to be consistent over a long period of time, just because I'm trying to remember, but the amount of successful starters who have been able to throw fastballs as often as him, it's a very short list.
Yes.
Very short list. And those are guys who you're talking about, like you were saying, who have 95, 96 kind of stuff. Now, of course, Ryan also has this level of deception that other guys don't have. You know, we've heard it with the arm angle, with the invisible or whatever they call it. But I really do need to see more out of his secondary stuff. Maybe his fastball ticks up once or twice. I don't think it's going to happen. But I just need to see a little bit more from him before I can sort of anoint him the savior of the Twins rotation. Yes. But I do like him a lot. I do like him a lot. I think he can settle in as a mid-rotation arm.
I ran this when he made his debut. I talked about it on the pod of starters currently at that time who were throwing as many fastballs as him, and it was fascinating. It was like Carlos Rodon, Robbie Ray. It was super hard throwing lefties. Yeah. And there was a third lefty in there. I can't remember who it was, but it was like 8 of the top 10 were left-handed, like strikeout lefties. It was crazy the way that it looked. And it was like Joe Ryan was in there. It was just random. So you're right. It's definitely, unique. Looking at a couple other guys on this list, a guy I'm really excited about for next year, and I've talked about him a little bit here. I want to see where you have him. You have him 14. I have him 13 is Emmanuel Rodriguez. And I think Rodriguez could soon not only be in the top 10, I think when you're looking long-term, Matt, you're looking at the graduations of Lewis and Martin and Miranda and all these guys. I think very soon he could be the Twins' best position player prospect in the system. And I would pick him coming up to be, as soon as next year or the year after, their best position player in the system. And I think at 18 years old and the power he showed last year, the swing and miss is there. We know that. But I just think from a raw tool standpoint, and we saw it last year with him, I'm really excited about Rodriguez.
Dude, we've talked too much now because we're on the exact same plane at this point. Because I was literally coming in here to say the exact same thing. I love Emmanuel Rodriguez as a name to keep track of for next year. He showed, like you said, there's a lot of swing and miss to his game, but also a lot of on-base ability. And you said the power really started to come around, and he's still incredibly young. I mean, I can call him a kid, which I don't like to do, but I could call him a kid because he is younger than me. But like you said, pretty much everything you said, I would double. I love him. I think keep your eye on him once the other guys graduate, once Celestino graduates. I think he's going to be the guy who represents probably the highest upside. Because we have a lot of real sort of low, I don't want to say low upside, but higher floor guys, kind of around that area, guys in like Sabato type of deal. Now, if I could actually, I want to bring up Sabato because I want to turn that around. I've noticed probably the biggest discrepancy between our lists is our placements of Aaron Sabato, because you have him on the top 10 and I dropped him down quite a bit. So what's going on there, my man?
I really liked him in the draft. I mean, I think sometimes when you have this like first impression base, and I did have that first impression base with Aaron Sabato. Like, loved him coming out of North Carolina when he was still there when the Twins were picking, I think at 22, 2 years ago now. I was like, yeah.
You called it, didn't you?
Yes, I was like, I just thought he fit their mold. You know, he fits everything they kind of look for. Advanced college bat, walks a lot, strikes out a lot, but big time power. I think the biggest thing for me, Matt, is anytime you have that high of a walk rate, but you're hitting $180 and you're walking as much as you are, to me, that is, I'm not hitting pitches in the zone, right? I'm not hitting fastballs in the zone when I'm getting pitches to hit. I'm putting myself in favorable situations, but I'm not hitting those fastballs in favorable counts. As soon as he moved up to Cedar Rapids, it was like that had clicked. It clicked for him. And the OBP was there. He was slugging. He was hitting pitches in the zone. He was hitting fastballs out of the park. He was hitting, I think he had a couple games where he hit 2 home runs, was dialed up. And when you see with Miguel Sano and like Brent Rooker falls into that mold, when they're dialed, there's very few who are better. And I think in this system, Sabato's ceiling is high to me as a hitter because when he's dialed, he's really tough. And I know he didn't put it up in the low minors last year. And I know he wasn't very good just from a numbers standpoint, but I fall in love with guys who get dialed like that. And Mitch Garver kind of falls into that line too. Like when he's dialed on a fastball, very few are better than him. And Sabato, to me, fits that same mold. And not everybody does, I don't think. But I think Sabato does. And I'd say Brent Rooker is probably at the lower end of that. We've learned, and you can see with Brent Rooker what can kind of happen as they get up to the majors and they strike out way too much for it to even matter. Sano has been great at times, has not been great at times. Sabato might fall somewhere in the middle of that, but I love his upside. And this is a good example of like seeing upside and saying to myself, like, who has the best chance to be the cleanup hitter for the Twins in 5 years? And I don't know if there's another guy like Sabato after that top 3 to me in Martin, Lewis, and Miranda. That's why I ranked him so high. Also, I'm looking at this, and I forgot Gilberto Celestino right off the bat, but we have them about the same spot. In the 10 to 20 range, we're about the same. I have Cantorino 10. You got Cantorino 10. I think there are a couple X factors here I want to talk about, Matt, especially on the pitching side. But first, I want to tell you about BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. NFL playoffs, this is a perfect time to be playing at BetOnline. You get a 50% welcome bonus when you use the promo code LOCKEDON. Head over there now. BetOnline is great. They have a new interface, new mobile website, new desktop interface. It's beautiful, and you can play today. March Madness is right around the corner. 51 days until Selection Sunday. Baseball may never start, but if it does, you're going to want to play. BetOnline, head over there now. It's a great site. We love BetOnline. So, Matt, some X factors in the system I think that stand out to me and on my list. Mention Cantorino. Like, if Cantorino hits his stride and he stays healthy, he's an X factor here. And when I say X factor, I think this system is going to do a good job of producing number 3s and 4s in the rotation. I think they can pull 3 or 4 at least out of this group. We look at your list too. I hope that among these, at 5 to 10 range, you have at 3 maybe of them will be mid-rotation starters. The difference to me is going to be, can they develop the frontline starter like we talk about all the time? And who has the best chance to be a frontline number 1? And I think you have them at 8, 9, and 10. I think it's Petty, Duron, and Cantorino. And I think Cantorino is probably the closest with Duron to the majors. Obviously, Petty maybe 3 years away or 4 years away. But I think 9 and 10, man, 9, on Duron and Matt Cantorino, I think have the highest upside. Would you agree, disagree, and why?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about those two players because I think you're right to a large degree that as far as like this X factor idea, I think those guys fit the mold. With Cantorino, I got to be dead honest. I am real low on him. I obviously incredible stuff. Probably, if not the best stuff in the system, at the very least up there. I mean, it's just mind blowing stuff. But he doesn't have 50 innings. Doesn't even have 50 total innings in the system. 2019, of course, that was the year he was drafted. Didn't pitch much. Didn't get to pitch in 2020, and then had to deal with injuries last year. So now it's been 3 years since he was drafted, and he's just barely pitched. And I just don't like that as far as his potential to then go on and become that starter, that top of the rotation guy, especially when there's already questions about his ability to stay there, given his let's just call it unique windup. When all those questions were already there and they kind of get exasperated by these injury problems, it makes it really difficult for me to see him as that kind of guy. I'd love it if he could be. Maybe he's fully healthy in 2022 and he goes and does it. Fine. Then all the questions are thrown out. But right now, I can't say for certain that he will be. And Duron's sort of also in that camp. Less so because his 2019 was a full year and it was a full phenomenal year. So he always has that to fall back on. But last year, I mean, it's heartbreaking that he came out and he was throwing fire and he was looking dominant. He was at AAA. We thought we were going to get to see him. And he only threw 16 innings, 16 somewhat middling innings. So again, I'm not sure what to do with those guys. They're probably the biggest fluctuators. They could rise as high as like 5 and 4 by midseason, and they could drop off as low as like 15, 16,
Yeah.
So right now I decided to split the difference on them.
Yeah. And I think when you were talking about Cantorino, you could have been talking about Royce Lewis. Like, everything you were saying was, hey, there are already questions. He got hurt. Haven't seen him in years. I mean, we saw Cantorino last summer and he was amazing, but as you said, short sample. So it's very similar. I'm going to pull mine up again here, Matt. I do have Lewis number 1. And I think for those reasons I mentioned, I still believe in him as an athlete. I still believe in him. I still believe in him as the one player in the system I can look and I say, who has the best chance to be a star? And maybe that's not the best way to look at it because I'm going to be disappointed a ton. I'm going to make mistakes all the time because you get caught up in this. But I don't think there's anybody else on this list, including Martin, including Miranda, who can do it on both sides of the ball, who has the tools to do it on both sides of the ball. It's tools for Royce Lewis, though. It's not results right now, right? It's not there. And until it's there, it's not there.